The Toklat River starts high up in the mountains of Denali National Park. The river can be accessed by taking a parked shuttle bus out to about mile 50 on the park road. The river flows through park wilderness for the first 20 miles or so if you intend to camp in that area, you need to get a permit from the visitor center. The water level is quite low in late May, so we planned on walking for the first several days down towards our destination, about 100 miles downriver, where the Toklat enters the Kantishna River. We carried about 10 days of food in our 16-foot Soar inflatable. Our intention was to take our time and look for wildlife and compare the scenery with what we had seen about 20 years earlier on a similar trip when we floated down in the fall. We stopped early on our first night, just above the first canyon, which is maybe 6 miles down below the Toklat Bridge. All of these braided channels come together just above that first canyon, so there was enough water to paddle through, but we're still pretty cautious. Ended up lining along the west side. There's also a small trail on the west side where a person could portage if they thought it was necessary. On an earlier trip down the Toklat, we had actually spotted 11 grizzly bears just between the bridge and the East Fork River. So we weren't at all surprised to see this female grizzly with 2 cubs up along a hillside digging up roots. The first canyon is probably more properly called just a narrow spot in the river. It's only a couple hundred yards and not really a canyon. You can see rocks on the east side, but on the west side you can walk along the whole way. We were just worried about the front of the boat catching on a concealed boulder, spinning around, possibly getting flipped. So we lined through, but I understand that people can easily go through this in the new pack rafts. Just below the Narrows opens up again, pretty wide, braided river. The Toklat water is quite silty. There are lots of side creeks that offer clean water for drinking, and some of those small creeks also offer access up to the high ridges for hiking. Very few people have floated down the Toklat. We didn't see anyone on the 2 trips that we took, although it is a popular hiking destination later in the summer. Recently, several people have pack raft down the Toklat as far as the East Fork River and then walked across the tundra back over to Sushana River. The old Stampede road is pretty much overgrown and almost unusable now. It's even hard to find it. So that walk across to Sushana would just be out on the open tundra. We continued to line the boat most of the second day and observed this moose crossing the river down below. We did find some stretches where we could get in and paddle for short periods of time. In fact, one of those stretches we floated right between 2 grizzly bears, one on each side of the river, and it appeared that they never even saw us. Needless to say, I didn't take the time to get the camera out as we paddled by. Early on our third day, we stopped at the mouth of the Clearwater River, which comes in from the west and brings quite a bit more water into the Toklat. This is very close to the wilderness boundary of Denali National Park. Looking back up the Toklat, you can see the very many braided, smaller channels. And once we got past the Clearwater, quite a bit deeper water, and we were able to paddle for maybe 10 miles or so before it again braided. Now that we were past the wilderness boundary of the Denali Park and into the new park area, we no longer had to worry about having a camping permit. And it would have been possible to float in one day through that wilderness area, eliminating the need for an overnight camping permit at all, just in case that backcountry unit was full. About 5 miles below the Clearwater River, we came to the second narrows of the Toklat. Cliffs on the east side, and pretty steep tree-covered hills on the left. But there is enough water to float through this without much problem. Just below that corner would be the East Fork River on the right. And we're surprised to find harlequin ducks swimming in the Wigan Creek rapids there. The East Fork River had very little water in it, very nice wide gravel bar, good for hiking.
Really?
Stampede Road comes across from Sushanna along the base of those hills. There's good walking along the East Fork Bar for about 3 miles toward the east until the East Fork River turns more to the south. And that's where the Stampede Trail started, back across the hills there, although it's hard to find. It's so overgrown now. Winter travelers use the old cat trails that are down on the low tundra for traveling across the snow. But summertime, it'd be pretty bad walking through this wet, tussocky areas.
Looking back up toward the park here, and the character of the river really changed once we got past the East Fork. East Fork comes in just before that bluff.
This single black wolf approached us as we were having breakfast one morning. She trotted up the gravel bar, looking for places to cross the river. Probably got within 100 feet of us, but never realized we were there. There's a large and healthy population of wolves within Denali National Park, but they tend to range outside of the boundaries of the park sometimes. So this one was just over the boundary of the new park to the north and could be subject to trapping or hunting pressure.
really cautious crossing. Very careful.
Having left the outer range mountains behind, the terrain became quite flat. Although there was still ice on the gravel bars, the river became quite braided again. We really had to pick our way through the different channels. This middle area of the Toklat River has a lot of ice forming in the winter because water percolates up out of the gravel all winter long and spreads out across the gravel bars. The Sushanna River enters from the east near here, and right through the winter doesn't freeze. It's an area that some people call Toklat Springs, so in the winter there are quite a few different animals that overwinter around here. We've seen eagles, ducks, and often bear tracks and wolf tracks right in the snow right through the winter because there's a big salmon run that comes up into this area and attracts the carnivores. The accumulation of ice out on the gravel bars seemed to force the water over to the sides and into brushy areas sometimes, so we'd be careful to stop and kind of scout ahead to where we were going. Walking on the side one day, we found this beaver. Seemed to be lunchtime for him.
Frequently see beavers at work. This one's about to have lunch.
We began to notice that most of the water was easing to one side of the river valley, and a lot of it going into bushes, forming new channels. It's a little spooky to go down these because you never know when you might run into a log jam. We tried to stay out in the open, but kept losing water until eventually we were dragging the boat through real shallows. This bald eagle circling overhead may have overwintered here. This area near the Sushanna River's mouth is called Toklat Springs and is the scene of one of the biggest chum salmon runs in interior Alaska. So there's a lot of eagles, bears, wolves, fox that frequent the area, especially in the fall, feeding on those salmon in the shallow water. We've seen a lot of bears here on the earlier trips. Most of the Toklat's water disappeared right here into the woods in a new channel that was forming, and it really looked too dangerous to go down without totally scouting the whole distance because of sweepers forming a log jam. It was quite shallow out on the main bar, but we were still able to pull the boat through it. About 10 miles before the Toklat enters the Kantishna, all the channels joined, forming one large channel that was very slow, but at least we knew where the water was. Nice camp here on the last gravel bar.
And this poor little calf we spotted as we were paddling down the river one day. Was trapped here, couldn't get up the bank, so we pulled in. Linda walks up and just able to grab it before it jumps in the river and got it up the bank where she could hear its mother in the brush.
There they go.
Here they are along the riverbank. These are sandhill cranes. Look like something that ought to be down in the Everglades, like an egret.
On June 7th, we arrived at the Kantishna River, which is a much bigger river with big wide open views of Mount McKinley in the distance, and started seeing lots of these swans. After 11 days, we arrived at our remote cabin on the Kantishna where we had a power boat waiting, and were able to drag it into the water and fire it up and head back toward Nenana. Along the way, saw several bears. This is a black bear with 3 cubs, who first was along the shore, and then later we saw her swimming the river. These are newborn cubs, but get around pretty well. "20 years earlier, we had done this same trip in our Klepper boat in late fall, late September actually, and didn't have a power boat waiting there at Kantishna, so we floated on down to Manley Hot Springs. That was another 2 days. That was a pretty nice trip, and you can have someone pick you up on the highway there if you want. Get a ride back into Fairbanks, or you can take a plane back into Fairbanks. All in all, I think the spring trip was a lot of fun. Maybe the fall trip might have been a little more interesting because more bears were there due to the salmon in the river. And of course during summer and early fall the water was a lot higher, so wouldn't have to do quite so much lining. We went pretty slow both times we floated the Toklat, but I think you could comfortably leave the park road and get to Manley within a week, or continue on down. Of course you can go down to Tanana Village and on down the Yukon if you want. We weren't sure if that last little cub would make it out of the river on its own or not. Would have been fun to rescue him.